Hey everyone, welcome to Now We're Talking, my show where it's my job to have interesting conversations about programming and technology. Super happy to be here with you guys today. And for those of you who don't know, my name is Cory Althoff, and I'm a developer advocate at Vonage. And I'm also the author of a book called The Self-Taught Programmer. And I have a new book coming out in July called The Self-Taught Computer Scientist. We are on Vonage's Twitch channel. And I'm a developer advocate at Vonage, like I said. And today with me, I have Chuks, and he is a recent or about to graduate from a CS program, and he just secured his first job as a software engineer. So we're going to talk about that, what that process was like, and dig into that, and hopefully learn a lot because, as you know, some of you know, I'm a self-taught programmer, so I don't have experience getting a CS degree. I've never done that before. So hopefully, I'll get the opportunity to learn a lot about what that process is like, what they're teaching these days, all that kind of stuff. So Chuks, thank you so much for being here with me.
No worries.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Doing well. It's about 9 a.m. here, so just starting to wake up. But you're calling from the UK, right?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Whereabouts in the UK are you?
So I'm currently in Wales, so Swansea, Wales. So it's about 5 p.m. over here. So we're just about getting into the end of the day for us.
Oh, cool. Very cool. So where did you grow up?
So I grew up in London, more specifically Southeast London, a place called Surrey. So yeah, that's about me really.
Very cool. And so were you interested in programming when you were growing up?
Yeah, so my uncle was actually a software engineer. So he kind of brought me into like the space of software engineering. So one of the first things that I kind of looked at was like Unity and building games within Unity. And that's kind of like how I started like programming as I was growing up.
Oh, cool. So how old were you when you started?
I was probably about 12, 13 when I first started like looking at programming.
Very cool. Nice. And did you immediately like it? Were you drawn to it pretty quick?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I think one of the things that kind of really interested me was all the different games and stuff that were on Unity at the time. So one of the things I kind of wanted to like do, that was my dream, was like build those same games. So I was like looking at the tutorials on how to build those games, and I think that's what made me like really love it from like the get-go.
What kind of games? Can you tell us more about that?
So after it's been a while now. So some of these were like platformers. Again, a few of these were like 3D like open world games. So it was really just anything that was on like the Unity showcase at the time. I remember watching like the each like year, like Unity would like showcase its like engine upgrades, and there was a particular year where they were showing the latest one. You had like a forge smith kind of just walking through like the environment, and that was just something that really interested me. I really liked that.
That's awesome. Cool. And so did you program throughout middle school, high school as well?
Yeah, so how it works here is that you have like normal subjects, and then at a certain level you have a thing called GCSEs. So at GCSE I took GCSE Computer Science, where the language that we were learning how to program using Python, and then after that, then I took it again at A level, and again we were learning how to program in Python. Learned about things like object-oriented programming, and then after that, then I just took it on to university where I am now.
Is that standard in the UK?
So no, it kind of just depends. It depends on the school. So not all schools provide computer science at high school level. Some provide it at only the A level and not the GCSE level. It's just dependent on the school. My school offered it like extensively.
Very cool. Okay, so then, so how did you feel that the like quality of like how good at programming were you by high school at this point?
It personally, I don't know how good I was. I think I could program decent applications. I think I could program like a few like small things, nothing that I can build now. But I think one of the things that I built back then was just trying to build like a personal assistant. So that's something that I built in my own time. Looked at using C# because that was a language that I knew from Unity. And then built like a little personal assistant that used like speech recognition. So it wasn't anything fancy. And again, it was a lot of tutorials and stuff that I used to kind of stitch it together. And one of the things was that we had a lot of bright students in the year around us. So students were building things all the time. Some built like facial recognition and a bunch of other things around us as well.
Very cool. Okay, and so then you got to college. Was there any question whether you wanted to do CS or not?
No, I think like after doing it at like GCSE and A level, I enjoyed it so much that I was really sure that I wanted to continue it at university. So it was a straight choice. All my university choices were straight computer science.
Okay, cool. And so what was that experience like when you were getting your CS degree? What kind of classes did you take? What was your first class?
Okay, so the first class is just programming 101. Because some students haven't taken computer science prior to joining university, they kind of get everyone on the same level. So the very first class I took was just how to program.
Okay, how to program. And so what programming language was that in?
So that was in Java. So they taught us how to program basically in Java.
Okay, cool. And we got some more people joining. So welcome everyone that's joining. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a question in the comments, and we will go ahead and answer that for you. But hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. So sorry, you said it was Java that you learned, right?
The first the language.
Did you feel like that was a good programming language to learn first?
I think it was good. It was difficult. There were a lot of things, especially because I learned Python, so there were a lot of things that I kind of had to unlearn and new things I had to learn, like for example, like things like types and stuff. But obviously the syntax language was very different to what is in Python. But it was relatively okay to learn, especially because there was a lot of support. We had things like labs and demonstrators, and as well as being able to speak to the lecturer via email as well. So we had a lot of support in that aspect.
Cool, very cool. Did any people drop out? Did they feel like, or
So like as with every new course, within the first week, a couple of people dropped out. I think like 10 or so people dropped out. Our university also offers another course, which is just straight software engineering. So some students started to switch over to the software engineering aspect because they didn't want to really deal with the more theoretical aspects of computer science.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I've actually never heard of that in the US, it being split between software engineering and computer science. I don't think we have that. I could be wrong, but I've only ever heard of people majoring in computer science at our university. Interesting. Okay, so what was the next class that you took?
The next class I took, within first year, was things like modeling computing systems. So this is just essentially, it's just like a fancy way of saying maths. So we looked at things like propositional logic, game theory. So what's the winning strategy within games like NIM or like tic-tac-toe, and what's the drawing strategy within those games as well if you can't win. So that was one of the things that we took as well. And then for the first year as well, the final thing was like computing issues. So looking at like the legal standpoint of computing within the legal issues within computing and computer science. And then within the second semester, it was software testing. So looking at how to test robustly, the different ways that we can test. So like equivalence class testing, pushing the boundaries. So like looking to see if we can do like erroneous testing or min-max testing as well. So just different things that we could do within software testing. And that was all first year.
Very cool. So do you feel like those classes were helpful?
The programming 101, probably not. I think it was something that we all kind of like said, was that the difficulty was a bit too low. So there wasn't really much of a chance to stretch yourself. But I think the second semester was better in the sense that the projects were interesting and there was a chance for you to kind of stretch your understanding in the exam right at the end.
Very cool. Okay, so someone in the comments said, I learned C programming and now I'm studying C++. Their first year at college. And here we got our first question. So if anyone else has questions, feel free to ask and we'll do our best to answer them. So can you give me some tips? That is the question. So you want to try to take that on?
Yeah, sure. So I learned C++ this third year. One of the things that I would say about learning C++ is really making sure that you understand the syntax, because, for example, the idea of constness and static is slightly different in other languages than it is in C++, and that can cause a lot of issues when handling things like memory, handling things like referencing, So making sure that you understand the reason that you're programming something before you just jumping into program is quite important, especially within a language like C++.
Cool. Good answer. And if anyone else has any other questions, let us know, and we'll do our best to answer them. Okay, so what classes do you take in your second year?
So second year, the first semester was databases, software engineering, and declarative programming. So databases is kind of self-explanatory. So we looked at relational databases, actually the relational algebra behind databases, and then we looked at using SQL. And then within declarative programming, we first looked at the functional programming paradigm, so using Haskell to learn how to do functional programming. And then we looked at logic programming using Prolog. And then finally, we had a group project, which was supposed to simulate real-world programming in terms of working in teams, where we had to build a top-down maze game, which is based off of another game called Chips Challenge. So those were the three things in the first semester. And then in the second semester, we had computer graphics, where the project was to visualize MRI slices and have light basically being shone through all the slices to show the general structure of an MRI. And then we had a more mathsy subject, which was automata and formal language theory. And this is just looking at what goes into defining the programming languages that we use. And then finally, we had software engineering, automata, and then we had human-computer interaction. So this is just looking at how users actually interact with the computing systems that we use. So it's not just enough to have like a nice UI. It's important to make sure that we have a good user experience as well. So those are some of the concepts that we're looking at, like things like modalities within devices.
And how many projects did you build during this time? Like, were you building actual, like, I mean, I know you mentioned one actual project you were working on, but were you building like a lot of apps or like sort of real world type of? First of all, just to fast forward for 1 second, what industry did you go in for your? I know you got a job as a software engineer, and you're going to be starting that. When are you going to start that?
So I'm starting that in July.
In July, and yeah. So what are you going to be working on in that?
So with what I've spoken to the team on, it's likely that I'll be working as a backend engineer, working on like transactional APIs. So they have, so the company is a planning company, and what they do is they do like a lot of planning software to like kind of forecast for different companies of different industries. So they themselves aren't in like any particular industry. They're more of like a SaaS company, and they help other companies of all industries in terms of like planning their business going forward.
Interesting. Okay, so did you feel so? You were so like you said, you're working on sort of back end code. Did you do a lot of that in your first and second year, or even your entire experience as a CS major?
So there isn't so within like the computer science like program, there isn't like a focus within the front end and the back end. It's really just like you have a project that you're expected to do, and then you kind of do that project.
So within like for 4 years, or just
no. So just for that module for that semester. So
gotcha.
So for example, like the first semester databases, we're expected to build a database that would be across maybe 2 weeks within that first semester. And then maybe you have like a Haskell program where you have to build a game a program that handles NIM using Haskell. Again, that would be across maybe like a month within the semester. It was rarely ever that it carried over into the second semester, except with the software engineering module. And the reason for that is because the computer science course and the software engineering course diverges within second year.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And we have a question really quick. I'm currently learning Python by my own. Can you give me some tips? So let's hear your tips for Python.
One of the things that I did to kind of really like understand Python in depth was doing practice questions as much as possible. So one of the things that I did to understand the fundamentals of the language was really doing like things like HackerRank and stuff to understand when to use a for loop and when to use a while loop. They ask a lot of really good questions that kind of like test your understanding of those basic concepts. And then once you really kind of understand the basic syntax and like understand when to use it, then I would say try and move on to like building a project as soon as possible. One of the first things I did was build like a really simple text-based game, and which was again based on NIM that I learned in school. So it's a case of like taking, like, you have two piles of biscuits. You take a biscuit from one pile to make sure that the winner has the last biscuit. So those kind of things, they test your understanding of the basics of the syntax of the language, as well as how to kind of put it all together. Hope that helps.
Yeah, that's a good answer, and that's what I did as well when I was learning Python. I focused a lot on games, and in my book, The Self-Taught Programmer, I was really game focused. The first really big program, or not big, but sort of complete program you build is Hangman and the card game War and stuff like that. So I always recommend that as well. I think that's a really good way to learn, and it's fun too. So I wanted to ask you, what was the most helpful class you think that you took, and what was the least helpful?
The most helpful was definitely, I think, this semester, where I was looking at advanced object-oriented programming, which was using C++, because it kind of made me relearn the fundamentals of programming and kind of like shore up like the skills that maybe I'd either like let weaken, or like I just kind of like assumed that I knew, because of the difficulty of like learning something like C++. You have to kind of be really sure about what you're doing before you program something. A lot of the time I would have things like segmentation faults, or memory issues, or dereferencing and pointers and stuff that, had I not, like, if I didn't think about properly before going into program, then I would get those issues. So that was definitely the most useful module, that I would say. I think the least useful module was probably the, I guess, human-computer interaction. Not because it wasn't a useful module, it was more so because it's not something that I want to kind of get into. But for someone that maybe wants to like look at UI and UX, that is, I think, like a good precursor to the UX module that we have in our final year this year.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. We got some people saying, agreeing that HackerRank is really good. And yeah, LeetCode is another good one too that I've been using. And I've just finished my book, The Self-Taught Computer Scientist, on data structures and algorithms. And it's been, I feel like I've just been doing LeetCode like every day for a year for like hours. So that's been tough. But I think that's going to help a lot of people because my goal was to sort of, in Python, explain some data structures and algorithms concepts that I feel haven't been, that you really have to search for to find a good explanation on the web, or they don't exist at all. So I was pretty happy to be able to do that. Okay, so how much math did you have to study in your?
So again, like in the UK, it kind of depends on the program that you're on. So at Swansea, there isn't actually a lot of emphasis on maths. There's more of an emphasis on practical skills. So the programming aspect. Especially when you have the divergence between computer science and software engineering. Within software engineering, there is no math. It kind of takes all of that out. Whereas with the computer science part, you're expected to look at like automata and formal language theory, which is like the maths part. So you'll be doing things like proof by induction, proof by contradiction, all of those to kind of prove things like context-free grammars, context-sensitive grammars, which can be quite mathsy. Prior to that, again, the only other like piece of like high level maths would probably be the propositional logic that we learned in first year, which all students had to take, and then this final year where you have the option to look at logic as a module. But in terms of maths on the two programs, there's not a lot of maths. But in other universities, there is a higher emphasis on maths. So I know that at my friend's university, maths is one of the key things that they have to learn. So things like Fourier transformations and vectors and all of those things, they have to learn all of those in the first year.
Cool. Yeah, that's super interesting. And so I wanted to ask you if you felt prepared. I mean, you sound super prepared, but do you feel prepared for your first job as a software engineer?
So I've done 2 internships prior to this job, but I still don't feel prepared, only because I think it's just like a bit of imposter syndrome. Yeah, being honest. I have done like projects and stuff, and I've obviously done like the computing projects that I've done at university, but it's just kind of like the more like not really knowing what's going to like be given to you, like the fear of the unknown essentially. So, but yeah, I think skills wise, I think I have the skills, but
Yeah.
it's one of those things that you're still kind of scared anyway.
For sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sure you'll do great. And we've got a couple questions. So can you explain the difference between web development and software engineering?
I can do it broadly. I can't really do it too in depth. I think in terms like, so is it within the context of like our course or just in general?
I think they mean in general.
Okay, so I think in general it's just it's more of the concepts between building web applications and websites. So with web development, you're expected to have an understanding of HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and if it's a web application, obviously looking at the back end of things as well. So like a good thing to know would be like Node.js, MongoDB for like the database or SQL. But then software engineering is a more broader term that can really like encompass like desktop applications, systems that be used in maybe like integrity systems or like console applications as well. So software engineering is like more of like the bigger like superset term, and then web development is like a subset within software engineering, I would say.
That's a great answer. And so we're gonna answer. There's a couple more questions. We're going to answer those. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the comments and we will do our best to answer them. Also, make sure to hit the subscribe button because I do this every week. And so make sure to subscribe to this Twitch channel. It's Vonage's Twitch channel. We have a lot of great content, but I'm going to be doing this every week. And so the next question was, I'm learning Python. I'm currently a manual QA engineer. My struggle is learning how to write automation/Python at my company. Any advice? It's completely different from writing scripts because these are actual programs. And so I know you said you took a testing and automation course, right? So do you have any advice here?
Unfortunately, no. So the testing that we did was very very basic level. So in terms of giving advice on how to do like automation, I'm sorry, I really can't give an answer to that. I'm still a student, unfortunately, so I can't give too much on that.
No worries. Okay, how about this? Do you think calculus is essential for programming?
I don't think it's essential, being honest. I think it's the skills that you need for calculus are very transferable to something like programming because of the fact that calculus can become very, very general. And I believe that programming is something that has to be quite general. It has to scale up quite a lot. So you can't think of it within set parameters. You kind of have to like expand. And with calculus, that is something that you have to think about as well. You have to think about something in a very general sense, especially with like all the formulae. So I think calculus isn't essential, but it's good to have.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think that's a great answer. I think you could make it through your whole career, say if you were a web developer, and have never taken calculus and be okay, but certainly will can help make you a better programmer. Okay, cool. So now I wanted to talk about your first programming job. So let's start with your internships. Where did you intern?
So I'm based in Swansea, Wales. My very first programming job was actually at a startup here in Swansea. So I took a job as a software developer intern, and my first job was really just to kind of build like a chatbot system for them. So one of the things that I think I learned was kind of trying to manage client expectations. When going in, being like a second year intern, one of the first things that they kind of wanted everything within a chatbot. So they wanted it to like have machine learning, to be able to understand text and just to have a full blown conversation. But it's a case of really understanding what the client wants and then managing the expectations that they have and the feasibility of the things that they want. So for example, like the machine learning had to be taken out because that's not really feasible, especially as they want to make a proprietary machine learning algorithm.
Yeah. So. I can imagine. So they wanted you to do that?
Yeah.
You're like, I'm an intern. You want to really that's crazy.
Yeah. So it was a bit much, but we use existing systems like Google's Dialogflow to put the entity system together, and then I use like another like a more visual like aid like communicate, which I then attached them together to build the chatbot system, and then we had like a more of a logic tree, like a conversation tree flow, which allowed us to channel like where the conversation was going, and then either give them the answer or then refer them to a relevant customer agent that can help them.
That's really cool. That's an awesome project to work on for your first internship. How long was that internship?
So that was for just under a year. So I started in October 2019, and then I finished in June 2020. And then I moved on to my second internship during the summer.
Awesome. And okay, cool. Very cool. And how did you get that internship?
So our university is quite good in terms of like posting jobs for students to do. So from my understanding, unlike the US and and Canada, we don't have things like co-ops over here. So any internships that we do get is something that we either get ourselves or is posted on the job boards by the university. So it was posted on the job board, and I applied, did the interview, and then I got the job.
Very cool. And can you tell us about your second internship?
So my second internship was working as a full stack engineer intern at IPC Systems, and I'm still currently on the internship, but I will be leaving. And what this job entailed was working primarily within the backend team, using Java to build a logging framework system for them. So what we were planning to do was you basically create like a logging middleware where HTTP requests would be intercepted and cached, so that if anything was going wrong during like a microservice process, then we could see where it went wrong, and at what time it went wrong and what went wrong. So that was one of the projects that I worked on. Another one was that I was working on analytics in terms of like the different microservices that they had. So I was using something known as Kibana and Elasticsearch to kind of get all the different logs that were being produced within the different microservices, and then create dashboards that could visualize all the different errors that are being thrown. We could then look into those different errors by region, by service, by timestamp, whether it was being thrown in particularly for like a particular customer, say Goldman Sachs. If it was being thrown within the region of Europe, we could then look at those errors in particular, which helped reduce the communication overhead that we were having, as well as being able to enable us to fix a lot of those errors before we went on to the next release of like our portal.
Very cool. Okay, and so now I want to talk about your job that you just got, your first software engineering job. So I'm assuming did you apply for that? Was that through your school? How did that work?
So this was basically something that I applied for myself. Okay. I saw the original job posting on LinkedIn. I had applied previously, but the recruiter there said that the original job posting wasn't for graduates; it was more for experienced software engineers, and that he would let me know when they would be posting like the graduate. So again, I got a notification for the graduate, and I applied for the graduate position, but I'd applied to other graduate places prior to that.
Very cool. And so, first of all, if anyone has any questions, drop them in the comments, and we will try to answer them the best we can. What was your interview like? Tell us about your interview.
So with this company, so the company's name is Anaplan. The first interview that I had was just a normal technical interview. So it was an hour long. The first half was basically getting to know me and him introducing himself. So he told me his experience, then he asked me about my experience. So some of the questions were like, just obviously tell me about yourself. What projects have you worked on? Why did you like this particular project? What did you learn from this particular project? And then we went into a coding exercise where it was essentially the question was quite simple, and it wasn't really to see if I could solve the question or not. It was more to understand how I work with another programmer in a pair programming setting. So the question they asked was essentially like a palindrome question, and it's a case of working with the interviewer to, one, obviously get the solution, but explain your reasoning as to why you've done this solution. And
can you explain what a palindrome is for people that don't know?
Right. So in a number, a palindrome for a number system is basically if you were to swap the numbers around, the number would still be the same. So for example, 121, if you swap it around, it's still 121. In a text context, like the band ABBA, for example, is ABBA. If you swap it around, it will still be ABBA. So that's palindromic as well. For something that's not palindromic, it could be like ABC. If you swap it around, that's now CBA. So that's not palindromic. So that was the question that was asked.
Was to identify if something is a palindrome, right?
Yeah. So it was, but yeah, basically just to identify if something's a palindrome and then return like a true or false statement from that.
Cool. And so what did you do to prepare for your technical interview? How long did you spend on that?
So primarily it was just leak code. So of course, with all my studies and stuff and all my projects that I had to do, what I did was I kind of set up a timetable. So the very first thing that I kind of do when I wake up is just do a leak code question a day, and then just try and solve it. If I can't solve it before maybe my first lecture, I'll either push it down to do later in the evening, or I look at the solution and really go into detail as to why I maybe didn't understand this particular solution question, so that I then can do a similar question to that and try and solve that question. But my primary thing is to make sure I do a leak code question a day.
That's very impressive. I feel like you're so organized, and that's awesome.
It's a lot of timetabling.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so we got a question for you. What languages do you like to work in?
So I'm currently working in Python for my dissertation project. I would say that that's something that I've really enjoyed doing. So I use it for my dissertation project as well as for my machine learning module as well. It's just really easy to use. It's just really clean and easy to use. I don't have to worry about things like semicolons and stuff. So it's quite nice to use. Other languages that I do work in as well are Java. To a lesser extent now, C#. C# was actually my first language. And I usually just kind of give support to my friends that are working on their projects in C# as opposed to programming myself in C#.
Very cool. Cool. So back to your interview, I want to talk about that more. So did you feel like you were prepared just from, getting your CS degree and doing your one leak code a day? How long was that? Were you doing one leak code problem a day for your whole college career, or was that the last 6 months, or how long were you doing that for?
I'll probably say it's the last 6 months. It wasn't something I was doing the entire university time. I think in second year, I was doing it quite extensively throughout the year, but it wasn't every day like I was doing this year. The way that the university system works here is you can get an industrial placement to do a year with a company. So that's why I was kind of working quite hard last year to do leak code. But again, it wasn't every day like I was this year. And the reason for that is because I could either take a master's or get a graduate job, which was the plan.
Gotcha. And so did you have a lot of technical interviews, or was this just one and done?
So with Anaplan, it was actually 3 interviews. So the first interview was the one that I just described. The second one was actually looking at projects that I'd already done, and then basically looking at the implementation details, my choices for certain things. Why did I implement this when I could have implemented it this way? What's the inefficiency of this? What was again the design choice for this? And then again at the end of the project the question was asked, if I could go back and do it again, would there be anything that I would do differently? And of course answering those questions as well. Did
you have any interviews at other companies that didn't go well? You got a question that you couldn't answer or anything like that?
Yeah. So I think one of the questions one of the interviews that didn't go well was my interview with Bloomberg. So I've actually interviewed twice with Bloomberg. So I interviewed this year and last year. Last year, I think my understanding of data structures was lacking. So when it came to doing a question, I really struggled on the interview.
Do you remember the question?
Yes. So it's actually on LeetCode. It's called Number of Islands, and it's essentially like a DFS, a depth first search question, where you basically find the number of connected islands within a binary matrix. So that was, looking in hindsight, it's not too bad a question, but when you haven't really practiced data structures and algorithms.
If you get a question like that you haven't, I feel like in a technical interview, it's all about I've already done this. And then you just pretend you're figuring it out on the spot. But I feel like there's no I've never seen this before. How to do a breadth first search or a depth first search or whatever, and then trying to figure that out on the spot is pretty difficult. I feel like you definitely have to have the concepts, or you already have to know them, and it's very helpful, of course, to just be a palindrome, detect a palindrome. Okay, I know exactly how to do that, or whatever.
A lot of the interviews are definitely based on recall. It can be difficult because obviously some of the companies also vary the questions so that it can't be based on recall, and it's more of your understanding. I know that I had a couple of interviews. I think I had an interview with a coding test with Two Sigma, and they changed the question. I recognized the question, but they changed it in such a way that it was a completely new question, and it was something that I definitely struggled on. So it's still very, very important to make sure that you fundamentally understand the data structures and algorithms. Something that I don't feel is covered enough at university.
Yeah, well, that's what my whole book is about, so that's good. So when I was writing my book, I was thinking a lot about like if I had to take a technical interview, like if I only had to learn like 5 things, obviously I cover way more than that, but what would I learn? One thing I felt like was if you just really understood all the ways to traverse a tree, that would get you. I say like 20% of problems that you see in technical interviews. Maybe not that high, but I feel like a lot, because even on LeetCode, if you just look at like the binary tree problems, you can seriously solve like pretty much every single one. If you just know how to traverse a tree, and that's all. Yeah. So I was like, okay, that would be huge. Like if you just if I only had to learn one thing to prepare for a technical interview, that may be it. And then I was just thinking, a lot about what other concepts come up a lot. Do you have any things like that you think like if I had to learn like one thing, this is what
if there was one question, I would definitely say it. Concept is linked lists, making sure that you know the standard linked lists, doubly linked lists, understanding how to insert, delete. What I think one of the questions that I practiced that was really difficult was flattening a multi-level linked list. It's on LeetCode. It's a very, very, in my opinion, it's a quite a difficult question because each linked list is doubly linked, and then each linked list has a child. So each node has a child, which can also be a doubly linked list, and then you then have to flatten it into one long stream of a doubly linked list.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it's. I think linked lists are definitely something that I would say learn. It came up in my coding test with Amazon, and it came up in another coding test I had, I think, with Goldman Sachs. So. For
sure, yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, I feel like linked lists and trees are like those always come up. Stacks too. I feel like being able to balance, like test if a string is balanced with parentheses. I feel like that comes up a lot.
Yes, yeah, that's something that's come up as well. Yep.
Cool. Okay, so all said and done, would you recommend getting a CS degree to people if people are considering it?
Yeah, so I think I definitely would. I think it's a good choice to get because of it's a standard path. I think if you don't want to go through the restricted path of having to do projects, and you want to do more like up-to-date projects, and you can keep yourself accountable, I think then I don't think a CS degree is necessary. But I think if you prefer that school structure, a CS degree is fantastic.
Cool.
I think
so you had a good experience.
Yeah, I had a fantastic experience. Yeah,
that's good. Very cool. I was wondering if you've thought about this at all. You might not have, but do you want to stay a programmer your whole career, or are you interested in moving into management at some point?
It's not something I've thought about at the moment. Being honest, I'm still really enjoying programming and building things. I think what I will do is further on maybe consider management, but right now I just want to program and build things. I think I like building things.
Premature to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, so what new trends in tech are you most excited about?
At the moment I've kind of been buried down under in terms of like my university work, so I haven't really been keeping too up to date. But I would say one of the new things that I'm kind of like interested in is how the idea of cryptocurrencies and stuff are being used like everywhere. There's a lot of utility coins that are being made and being used in a lot of different things. So I've been keeping track of Stellar. Stellar got has seen use, I think, in Ukraine, and then again, of course, Bitcoin. Of course, Bitcoin has just been growing, and obviously the price has skyrocketed. But in terms of other techs and stuff, I think there was something that I saw where someone's trying to build a web 3.0. So it's more of a decentralized web. So that's something I've kind of been looking at, just in the corner, just because the idea is so it's used for all, as opposed to the internet being dominated by corporations.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did you interview with any cryptocurrency or blockchain companies when you were looking for
Um,
jobs?
no, so I did look, but I didn't find any like graduate positions with cryptocurrency places.
That's interesting. I mean, when I was interviewing for my job, I eventually ended up at Vonage, but I
Hmm.
felt like every company I was talking to was a cryptocurrency company. It
Yeah,
was
yeah.
crazy. Like there's so many cryptocurrency startups right now. And
Hmm.
talking to them was insane. Like you said, that like they just have these grand visions of building an entirely new internet that,
Hmm.
for those of you that don't know, they're calling it Web 3.0. And what they want to do is add trust. They want to add a layer of trust to the internet.
Hmm.
And by adding these smart contracts that you see with Bitcoin and Ethereum and all that, they want to add smart contracts to go really above just, they see, cryptocurrency as just one application of this technology. But they want to do stuff like, for example, with Twitter, instead of having Twitter owned by one giant corporation, they want to create an internet where Twitter is distributed. The ownership of Twitter is distributed among, maybe millions of people, and it's open source, and everyone contributes to the code, and everyone host a little bit of it on their computer, and this is something I'm still learning about, but that's sort of is that the vision that you've understood it?
Yeah, it is. And I think it makes sense. I think people kind of want the power back to them to themselves, as opposed to in like the hands of like a few corporations that may not have their best interests at heart. So
Yeah.
I think the dream is quite interesting. So
Yeah, it was crazy talking to these companies, because I felt like it must have been what it felt like to talk to the people that were starting to build personal computers,
mhm.
because their vision is just so huge, and
Yeah,
it sounds like a little bit crazy. Like I was
yeah,
talking to these founders of cryptocurrency companies, and I was like, you sound like a little bit like it just sounds like so bold
yeah.
and stuff. I'm imagining that's what it always sounds like when you're sort of like starting a new paradigm of
Mhm.
doing things. So that, yeah, super interesting, cool. And so any other trends in tech, or was that the big one?
I think that's the big one for me. Like I've mostly been buried in my research, to be honest.
Yeah, no worries. That's super cool. Well, and then I just wanted to also ask you, just what are you interested in outside of programming?
Outside of programming, I'm actually interested in things like finance and sports. So sports wise, well at the moment because of the COVID situation, haven't been able to play, but rugby and athletics. So I really enjoy those two things, and recently been getting into like volleyball. Um,
Cool.
but outside of that, it's just things like finance as well. So looking at like how looking at how the economy is going, both here and in the US. So yeah, just keeping up to date with like finance, politics, and then of course sports as well.
What draws you into being interested about finance and how the economies are doing in different countries?
So it's more so kind of like growing up. My parents were within finance, so especially my mum. So I kind of was always around like the finance like space. I think now what kind of interests me is just like how certain like events kind of like affect like things like markets. So for example, like last year for the first time ever, the oil price went negative, and it's just mind blowing that a price can suddenly go negative. So
Oh well,
yeah,
I
so it
didn't
was
know
just
that.
yeah, it
How does
was
the
yeah.
price go? How does the price go negative? No
It's
one
actually
wants it. Like, you have to pay people to take it.
yeah. So basically, the idea was that because um, they were running out of storage space, and because no one's producing oil because of the situation that was at the time, there was such a huge uncertainty, but people were still producing like loads of barrels of oil. So it effectively became cheaper than to buy oil from these places that they kind of were buying space. It's a weird way to explain, but basically the reverse happened in terms of like bartering systems, which meant that the price went just kept going down and down and down to the point it became negative, and then the markets had to shut down essentially.
When was this?
This was I think March last year.
How come gas didn't become like free at that point?
I have no idea. Is the honest answer. I think that's something that you kind of need to take up with your government.
That's super interesting though. Negative oil prices. I've never heard about that.
Mhm.
That's any other interesting facts like that?
Um, Honestly, no. I think that was just like the big thing that kind of like drew me. But yeah, no, I've just kind of been keeping up to date with that. And I think obviously my other like kind of passion is gaming as well. So I've been really getting into kind of like playing Valorant. Is quite a fun game to play, and League as well. Like I'm more of a console gamer, so I've recently been getting into like PC gaming. So the two big games that I've been playing are League and Valorant.
What kind of games are those?
So Valorant, I'm not sure if you're aware of like CS:GO.
Mm.
Okay, so it's basically like a first person shooter, and it's so it's basically a first person shooter on like console, but I'm not on PC, but it's like a lot slower paced, a bit more strategy, and then League is like essentially it's like I don't know how to explain it. It's basically like a massive map, but you have like three lanes on either side, so you have top, bottom, middle. And then you have the same thing on the other side, and you have like different characters with different roles, and then you basically have to destroy like the enemy like Nexus on that side, or they destroy yours. So
that's cool. Nice. That's I'm gonna have to check that out. Have you ever played Starcraft?
No, I haven't. I've heard of it, but I haven't played it.
That was the big game that I've always traditionally played. That's cool. And so yeah, no, I was interested to ask you about rugby. So, like, how often were you playing rugby before the pandemic?
So not too much. So it was mostly like playing it with friends and stuff, and maybe if like during the summer, like we'd go and play touch rugby. But prior to that, like I used to play a lot for my school. So yeah, that
did you get hurt a lot? Is it?
Yeah, it's So it's essentially like American football, but we have a bit more continuous play.
But there's no like helmets, right, or equipment?
No, there's no helmets. So there's no helmets, there's no pads. You just wear a t-shirt and shorts and boots, and you just run and hope that you don't get hit.
Have you ever broken anything?
No, I haven't. I was close to breaking my jaw though. Basically, I went into score. So in American football, it's a touchdown, but in rugby, it's a try. So I went down to score. I went down to score a try, and I dived. And one of the defenders, like the final defender, he dived as well. And we were both like kind of going at top speed, and his head like connected with my jaw, and I then landed on the floor as well. So so my jaw was really swollen. Luckily there wasn't any breaks, but it was quite close to breaking, and I had to get it checked out.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really cool. And what was the other sport you said you played?
Athletics.
Athletics?
Yes. Track and field.
Oh, track and field. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah, sorry.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Do people play basketball a lot in the UK? That's
it's definitely played. It's not as popular as things like football or soccer, and rugby. So those are like the two main sports in the UK. But it's definitely played a lot.
Very cool. Cool. Well, okay, that's went through. We sort of sped through all the questions that I wanted to ask you. Does anyone in the audience have any questions that you would like for us to answer? So we're going to be wrapping up here. And thank you all so much for coming. And Chuks, thank you for doing this. So if anyone has any last minute questions that you'd like to ask about programming or rugby, CS degree, your first coding job, feel free to drop that in the comments, and we will answer that. Is there anything that you want to add? Is there anything that I didn't ask that you hoped I'd ask, or anything that at all you'd like to say? Oh, Chuks, that was to you.
oh, sorry, my bad. Honestly, no. Again, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to come on stream and kind of talk about my experience. Yeah, thank you.
Of course, yeah, it's really cool. Is there anywhere that if people have like a follow-up question, and the best place to follow to keep in touch with you, is it Instagram or your Twitter or anything like that?
Yeah, so I'll say best place to kind of reach me is Instagram. My Instagram is, I'm just checking it now, is literally just my name, so Chuks Ajeh, so CHUKS AJEH, and that's the best way to reach me on Instagram.
Okay, here we go. That's the username. If you want to follow Chuks on Instagram, you can ask questions, maybe send him a DM, and cool. Okay, well, a couple of things to wrap up. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is Vonage's Twitch channel. We have a bunch of content streaming every single week about programming, showing off our APIs, doing interviews. Like I said, I do this every week. I interview someone interested in tech. So make sure to hit subscribe, and you can check out next week's show. So if you also want to check out our communications API, so Vonage has sort of transformed. A lot of people think of Vonage as VoIP calls over the internet, but we have now a ton of communication APIs. So we've got APIs for text messages, for phone calls, for live video streaming like this. So we have a lot of really, really cool APIs. So if you want to check that out, I'm going to pop the link into the chat. So you can go here if you want to check out our APIs. And we also have our own community. It's called Vonage Voyagers, and it gives you access to early programs and cool limited edition swag and other stuff like that. So if you want to become a Vonage Voyager, I'm going to drop in the link as well. But yeah, so our Vonage community is super cool. You might want to check that out. And got a question here or a comment. Hopefully we get to see some web dev front end API stuff in the future. So cool. Yeah. I would love to hear what people are interested in. So I can definitely make that happen. And thank you so much for the suggestion. Thanks for the stream. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you everyone so much for coming. This was really, really fun. I appreciate all your questions. Make sure to hit subscribe, and hopefully I'll see a lot of you next week. Chuks, thank you so much for being here and answering all my questions and everyone else's questions. That was really, really nice of you. And it was super interesting getting to hear about your experience, getting a CS degree and everything you learned. It sounds like you are super, super prepared for your job. Even though you said you don't feel prepared, you sound incredibly prepared and well organized. And I have no doubt that you're going to be super, super successful in your job. So thank you so much for doing this. It was really awesome getting the chance to talk to you. Cool. And all right, we'll stay in touch. All right. Thank you, everyone.